Okay. If I recall, where were we? Was it the fact that we didn't have a Bet Din, right?
That's very well.
Yeah, I think we were over here. Hamishat Talmidim Hayu Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, no? Yeah, because we had Hillel Kiblu Hillel uBet Dino, and then we said Hamishat. That was the end of the Bet Din. Nachon?
Yes, correct.
Hamishat Talmidim Hayu Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Did I put it up normally? What did I do?
Yeah, but it's okay for. I'll get the Sefaria link.
Do you know where it is?
If you can't put it up now.
I there.
I don't know why my computer is so low, the volume. Okay. חמישה תלמידים היו לרבן יוחנן בן זכאי והם גדולי החכמים שגבלו ממנו. There were 5 talmidim that Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Remember, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai is at the time of the Churban Bet Midrash. Right, so he's the one that's dealing with the Churban. He's the one that's negotiating Yavne v'Hachameha. He's the one that's dealing with all of this. So he has 5 talmidim that received from him. Rabbi Eliezer Gadol. Rabbi Eliezer Gadol is just Rabbi Eliezer. Anytime you see Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah, it's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yosef Kohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was exorbitantly wealthy. Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef kibel Rabbi Eliezer Gadol. So now you're getting to some more familiar territory. And Rabbi Akiva, who it says Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, was a ger. His father was a ger. So Rabbi Akiva, there's a whole story about Rabbi Akiva, that he went and he learned from the Hachamim. He was 40 years old, and he learns from Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was a Shamoti. And what that means is that he was a Talmid of Bet Shammai. He was Talmid of Bet Shammai. So he is extremely strict, Rabbi Eliezer Agadol. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer is the guy who's in the Sugya and Baba Metziyah with the Tanur of Achnai. So Rabbi Eliezer is the one that normally is most strict because he's a Shamoti, and he learned in the Bet Shammai. And so the manufacturer of the Tanur of Achnai figured that if he goes to Rabbi Eliezer is Matir, and everybody else is going to be Matir, because everybody else is more lenient than him. They're all Bet Hillelniks. And Rabbi Eliezer did Matir the oven, and everybody else was Mahmir, curveball on his oven. Rabbi Eliezer gets put into Cherem later, and Rabbi Akiva has to go tell him. It's all a problem. Yosef Aviv Ger Tzedek. So Yosef, the father of Rabbi Akiva, was a Ger Tzedek. Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Meir ben Ger Tzedek, and so also Rabbi Meir was the son of Gerim, which is astonishing. It's astonishing. And the reason why it's astonishing is not because they were Gerim, but because these 2 men, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir, are literally the entirety of Torah Sheba'al Peh that we have today. In other words, the whole Torah Sheba'al Peh that we have today is because of them. So it says that you're going to see the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva in a minute, and it says that all of them, they wrote the Tosefta and the Bareitot and the Sifra and the Sifrei and the Mechilta, all of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, which is all of the Torah Sheba'al Peh that we have today. And the Gemara says, Vehakol aliba de Rabbi Akiva. And all of it is after the heart of Rabbi Akiva, which means that all the Torah Sheba'al Peh, essentially the core Torah Sheba'al Peh that we have today, which when I say the mitzvah, remember at the beginning of the Hakdamah, we said there's Torah Sheba'al Peh that is clearly defined, as opposed to the Gemara, right, which is broad and unfinished and constantly developing. They put down the Torah Sheba'al Peh in writing. So all the Torah Sheba'al Peh that we have is basically from Gerim, and that's when we know that Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. In other words, an unnamed Mishnah in the Mishnah, and all of the Mishnah, we attribute that to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, as Rabbi Akiva, as the Rambam says, Ben Gerim Aya, Ger Tzedek. קיבלו מרבי עקיבא. So Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Meir received from Rabbi Akiva. וגם קיבל רבי מאיר וחבריו מרבי ישמעאל. And Rabbi Meir and his Haverim also received from Rabbi Ishmael. So it means Rabbi Ishmael was like Rabbi Meir was like a Talmid Haver of Rabbi Akiva. Excuse me, of Rabbi Ishmael. Havirav should Rabbi Meir him. Who are the contemporaries of Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Udar, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon. The Rabbi Shimon, by the way, is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the Talmid of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was his Rebbe. Rabbi Nehemiah, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Rabbi Yohanan Asandla, Rabbi Shimon ben Azai, Rabbi Hananiah ben Tradion. Oh my gosh, these guys, you have to understand, like these were the most eccentric, unbelievable people. Rabbi Akiva's friends also received from Rabbi Eliezer Gadol. So what he did over here, Harambam, was he said, okay, so there's Rabbi Eliezer, there's Hillel Shammai, Rabbi Eliezer, and then there's Rabbi Akiva, and then Rabbi Akiva's students and their friends, and then he goes back up again. And he says there was Rabbi Akiva's friends. And who are they? Havirav shel Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbo shel Rabbi Yosef Gelili. Right? Rabbi Tarfon is the Rav of Rabbi Yosef Gelili. Why do they call him Rabbi Yosef Gelili? Because he came from the Galil. That's why. Rabbi Shimon ben Azav, Rabbi Yohanan ben Nuri. Right? So you know these guys because they're in the Haggadah. If you never studied Mishneh, they're the guys in the Haggadah. Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Ayu Mesubim, Nebirak. These were all the contemporaries. Rabban Gamliel Azaken Kibel Rabban Shimon Aviv Beno Shel Hillel. Right? So Rabban Gamliel the elder received from Rabban Shimon his father, who was the son of Hillel. So notice this is very important because this is the line of the Nasi. So Hillel was a Nasi. His son Shimon was a Nasi, and we call him Rabban Shimon. His son was Gamliel Azaken, and we call him Rabban Gamliel. The Rabban, Rabbeinu, it's another way of saying Rabbeinu, is given to the Nasi. Yeah? So we continue down, and then they start naming their kids back and forth. Shimon Gamliel, Shimon Gamliel, Shimon Gamliel, right? So they give it as a dynasty, as a lineage, which incidentally is, first of all, a siman that you can name after the living, unlike the Ashkenazim. And second of all, it is the source of the Menag of the Sfaradim, many Sephardim who name this way. Their firstborn son is named after the father's father. And the firstborn, yeah, and that's how it continues. So, Rabban Gamliel Azaken kibel Rabban Shimon Aviv beno shel Hillel. Rabban Shimon beno kibel mimeno. Who's Rabban Shimon? The son of Rabban Gamliel Azaken is named Shimon, like his grandfather, and he received from his father, Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel beno kibel mimeno. Right? So then there's Rabban Gamliel Azaken. His father is Shimon. His father is Hillel. So we have Hillel, Shimon, Gamliel Azaken, Shimon, Gamliel. That's where we're at. Rabban Shimon beno, then his son is Shimon. Beno Shimon kibel mimeno. And then he has a son, Shimon has a son named Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda beno shel Rabban Shimon, zehu hanikra Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So, okay, again, what's the lineage? Hillel, Shimon, Gamliel Azaken, Shimon, Gamliel, Shimon, Yehuda. So, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is a direct descendant of Hillel Azaken. Clear? And that's the line of the Nisi'im. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was named Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our holy Rav. But he also learned from others, not just his father. He also learned from Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua and Rabbi Shimon Havero. Right? He has a friend, Rabbi Shimon. Now he says, who is this Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who we call Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Why do we call him Rabbeinu HaKadosh? Who knows? I need the Jeopardy music. No? Who wants to volunteer to get the Jeopardy music next week? Anybody? You want to sing it? A cappella? No? Okay.
Also,
We call him Rabbeinu HaKadosh because it was said about him that he never saw keri. He never saw any seminal emissions that were not for the sake of union, which is the rarest of things. But that's one of the things the Hachamim say, which is a big question. I mean, how do they know? Yeah. So either there's testimony of his own that we believe, right? Or we recognize that this man essentially lived his life without any haphazard elements to it. And it says about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi that the reason why we consider him essentially the more broad aspects of the reason why we call him a Kadosh is because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi became an individual that was so connected to the nature of the world and his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and for that matter, the relationship that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had with Bnei Israel, with the Am, with the Klal. So, there's stories told in the Gemara that the Rabbeinu HaKadosh would not laugh, because when he would laugh, bad things would happen to Klal Israel. And it says that Bar Kapara, when we say Taneh Bar Kapara would try to make him laugh because he thought he was too serious. He thought he was taking himself too seriously. So he would come in with like a planter on his head, Chiquita banana or something like that, like slapstick stuff. He wouldn't he would do all kinds of crazy stuff. Bar Kapara was a little bit of an eccentric person anyway, he was eccentric. But in any case, Rabbi Yehuda would laugh, and then he would say, and then bad things would happen. He would say, I told you, please stop making me laugh. I can't do that. They're very strange stories in the Gemara. But in any case, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbeinu HaKadosh Hiber Mishneh. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh was also profoundly wealthy. He was an extremely wealthy man. They say that he was so wealthy, one of the ways that they kind of express this is they say that his stable master of his horses was richer than King Shapur of Persia at the time, because he used to sell the manure of the horses of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he made a fortune doing that. So, okay, whatever it is. The point is, he had a lot of money. And so he was able to, so that's why they say that from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until the time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Lo ra'inu Torah u'gdula b'makom echad. We did not see a full holding of Torah and political strength and power in one person, right? And you'll say, what do you mean? David HaMelech and all of it. Not that way, right? Even David HaMelech, he was a tremendous Chacham, there's no question about it, but he wasn't necessarily recognized as the Mekabel, right? As the one who was holding all of it and the full power of the politics in one person. Not only that, the truth of the matter is that David HaMelech took him a very long time to actually be a powerful king. He was not a powerful king for a lot of years. Right? One line about David HaMelech, which I always impacted me personally very much, is that he says, when he first becomes king, his cousins, the sons of Seruya, who was his aunt, they're all called the children of Seruya because it's through their mother that they're related to the king. And so normally you would say that somebody's a son of their father. And they're called like Yoav ben Seruya. Yoav ben Seruya is called Yoav ben Seruya, the son of his mother, because it's his mother that made him related to the king, to the royal family. But it didn't matter because Yoav was much more powerful than David. Because Yoav was a strong general in the army before David became king. He was a very famous person in the Am. He was a celebrated warrior. And he manipulated King David all the time, constantly, to do the things that he wanted King David to do. And people would complain. And David says, Adayin rachani mipnei bnei Tzeruya. When he was king, he would say, I'm still very soft in the face of the children of Tzeruya. They manipulate me right and left. They're constantly pressuring me. The politics were all there. In any case, why am I telling you this? Because until Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the Hachamim say, from Moshe, until Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, we didn't have one person who held the absolute authority of Torah and the absolute authority of leadership, political leadership, in one person. And that was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So he was, beyond. The man was rich, the greatest Hacham, and the most powerful individual in the nation. So he held profound clout and authority. And therefore, what he did was he used his clout and authority to write the Mishnah. And what he did was he basically told the Hachamim, I will fund you, sit down and write the Mishnah. Gather all your notes, take everything that you have, all that you've received, we're going to gather it together, and we're going to put it into a systematic structure that I'm calling the Mishnah, and it's going to be set up by Masechtot, Mishnayot. It's going to start with Zra'im that is connected to Eretz Yisrael, and it's going to go through, and so on and so forth. And that's what he does. And it's an aberration, because who said you're allowed to do this? He's not allowed to write it down. And so he has to do a special limud in order to be able to let him write it down. Harambam is going to deal with this a little bit. But incidentally, Harambam saw Rabbi Yehuda Nasi as his hero. He saw Rabbi Yehuda Nasi as the reason for his Mishneh Torah. In other words, Harambam genuinely believed that he was redoing the Mishnah by the Mishneh Torah, but in a better system. He thought that his system was a better system for what Klal Yisrael needed post-Talmud, right? Mishnah is wonderful pre-Talmud, but post-Talmud, it's a mess again. So he saw himself as the new Rabbi Yehuda Nasi that was formulating all of Torah Sheba'al Peh into a systemized text, which he says outright. He says, all you need to do is read the book of the Bible in my book, and you're done as far as knowing what you need to know for Torah Sheba'al Peh. Remarkable. So he says over here that Rabbeinu Kadosh חיבר המשנה, ומיימות משה ועד רבנו הקדוש לא חיברו חיבור שמלמדים אותו ברבים בתורה שבעל פה. And he says another thing. From the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until the days of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, no book was comprised or authored that presented Torah Sheba'al Peh. Because what was going on? It was being passed from person to person. It wasn't written in a formal book. They were allowed to keep their own notes, but it wasn't presented as a published work for people. Rather, what happened is in every generation, Rosh Bet Din or Navi, she'aya be'oto dor, kotev la'atzmo zikaron b'shmot sheshama merabotav u'melamed al peh barabim. He would have his own notes, but he would teach it publicly, orally. Never wrote things down like that. Not allowed to. There are other Gemarot. Harambam is not posek these halachot, which is very interesting. But the Gemara says, for example, Yisarfu divrei Torah v'ali katevu, that the words of Torah should be burnt before they're written down. Yeah, or that's asur to write things down. The devarim she'al peh atar asher omran b'chtav, right? Things that are ba'al peh, not allowed to put them down in writing. Harambam is not posek any of those halachot, interestingly. So he sees them as principles, not necessarily as legal restrictions. וכן כל אחד ואחד כותב לעצמו כפי כוחו בביאור התורה מלכותיה כמו שאמר מדברים שחשו בכל דורתו בדינים שלא למדו מפי שמועה במידה משל 19 מידות שהסכימו עליהם בדין הגדול. And so too, even the stuff that wasn't given, this is very important because here he's indicating that there are things that comprise Torah Sheba'al Peh that were not given at Sinai, but that were decided by the Bet Din HaGadol through the Shlosh Midot SheTorah Nidreshet Bahen and became part of the corpus. That's how it always was until Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rabbeinu HaKadosh changed everything. And it's not the first time Rabbeinu HaKadosh changed everything. There were several things that he did that changed everything that his fathers did, and they yelled at him for it. It's a very simple thing. And, it's told that he was matir the vegetables of Bet She'an, that they didn't need to be taken, Masrot didn't have to be taken from them, because they weren't considered part of Eretz Yisrael. Because there was questions of Bet She'an and its borders, as to whether it was included in part of Eretz Yisrael or not. All of his grandparents, right? We just spent the lineage, right? From Hillel down to him. All of them said, no, you have to. You have to take Masrot. And he said, no. He was matir the Yerkot Bet She'an. And so the Hachamim knocked on his door and said, how dare you? Davar she'avotecha ve'avot avotecha asru ata tatir? Things that all of your grandparents said it was asur, all of a sudden you're going to come and say it was motar. Who do you think you are? And his answer is astonishing. And he was only the one who had the clout to answer this way. But what he answers is recorded in the Gemara, and very important principle for us. And he simply says to them, Makom hinihu li avotai. Yeah, they left me something to do. And this was waiting for me to do. And they looked at him like, what are you talking? That's a very convenient thing to say. He said, I'll prove to you that happens. He said, let me ask you a question. He said, Moshe Rabbeinu, he made the copper snake, right? There was a whole magifah in the desert. The snakes were coming out, poisonous snakes, and biting the people, and the people were dying. And Moshe calls the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu just make a copper snake. When they look at the snake, they'll be okay. You know the story, right? You know the story? So the Rabbi Yehuda said, well, what happened to that snake? You know what happened to the snake? It became an Avodah Zarah. They called it Nehushtan. People started praying to the snake. You know how long people were praying to that snake? Until the time of Hizkiyahu HaMelech. That means all through the time of the Shoftim, all through Shaul and David and Shlomo and all of the subsequent kings that were good kings. Yoshua, all of that time. What were they doing? Praying to the snake. How come they didn't take it away? How come they didn't melt it down? How come they didn't do something about it and fix it? How come it took until Hizkiyahu HaMelech to do it? He said, Makom menichu lo avotam. It was his to do. For whatever reason, it was his window. And he took it. That's it. Yofi. So that's the Binu HaKadosh. What did he do? Hu kibetz kol hashmot. He gathered all of the things that people, all of the private notes that people had taken, v'chol hadinin, and all of the laws, v'chol habiurim, and all the explanations, v'chol hapirushim, and all the commentaries, sheshamru mi Moshe Rabbeinu, v'shilmdu bedin hagadol shel kol dor v'dor b'chol haTorah kula. Not only what was given over by Moshe, but what was given and what was mechudash in every bit din, in every generation, he gathered it all. V'chiber mehakol sefer HaMishnah, and from all of it, he authored the Mishnah. V'shinino barabim, and once he had it compiled, he taught it publicly. V'nigla lechol Yisrael, and it was revealed to all of Israel. V'katvuhu kulam, and everybody wrote it down, meaning they had scribes that were caught, because they didn't have printing presses until a lot later, right? So they had scribes that were copying the Mishnah. They pushed it out to all the people. Why? Because it was getting to a point that the Torah was starting to get diluted and lost. And so they did this. So the Torah shouldn't be forgotten from Israel. Which tells me something. Which tells me that the brit between God and Israel does not ensure that the Torah will not be forgotten. That's staggering. And it's not the only time that it says this. There's an argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Chia about the Torah. He said, if the Torah was all forgotten from Israel, well, what are you talking about, Torah forgotten from Israel? Why are you even speaking about that? There's a possibility. Now, why did Rabbeinu HaKadosh do this? And he didn't just leave it as it always was. Because he saw that the circumstances were getting bad. Galut was beginning. Yerushalayim was destroyed. People were starting to disperse. They were being distracted, and the Talmidim were not as strong and many as they used to be. They were getting more hardships on the people and restrictive situations on the people. And the evil kingdom, which is a euphemism or a nickname for Rome. Anytime you see Malchut HaRish'ah, it's always referring to Rome, right? Because it's our twin brother. We hate him. He's a loser. And he constantly bothers us and tries to destroy us. So it was spreading throughout the world and getting stronger, the Roman Empire. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was very concerned about, he had foresight, he had vision. He recognized that the way, and this is so important, he recognized that the way that we were doing things until now, even though it was over 1,000 years that it had been done this way, it was time to stop it because it wasn't working anymore. And so he needed to change what was done, even if it was seen as an aberration, which is in itself shocking, which tells us that we have to consider such things sometimes. And you'll say, what do you mean? Nobody did it before. And you have to answer, okay, makom menichu li avotai. You say, well, yeah, but you're not a Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Yeah, but Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu either. So there there are things that have to be considered. And sometimes they're little mini things. They're not big Rabbeinu HaKadosh things. Sometimes they're little mini things. So Israel was dispersing all over the place. The Jewish people were going all over the place. Notice, by the way, Harambam, notice, Harambam never says Yehudim. He always says Israel. Always. So the Israel מתגלגלים והולכים לקצוות. חיבר חיבור אחד. So what he did was he made a portable Torah. That's what he did. He made a portable Torah so that every single person could have it in their hand. להיות ביד כולם, כדי שילמדוהו במהרה ולא ישכח. So that they could learn it easily and quickly, because the Mishnah is very concise, and it's like signs and signals to remember the Torah, and that people shouldn't forget it. V'yashov kol yamav hu ubetino v'limed Mishnah barabim. And the rest of his life, he just spent teaching the Mishnah, him and his bet din, and putting it all over the place. Sina.
With regards to Yodan Asi, could one say that if he wasn't as powerful and as rich as he was, we wouldn't be where we are today?
Yeah, possible.
That's crazy. So it wasn't necessarily because of his being a Talmid Hacham.
No, of course it was. If he wasn't Talmid Hacham, his rich and powerful would be meaningless.
But also, if he didn't have the money to be able to...
Yeah, it's both. It's both.
Because it's an expensive endeavor.
It's extremely expensive, but he was able to afford it.
Interesting.
Is that all?
That's all.
Ohad Fidida.
Why is it such a problem to write down the Torah, for the Torah Shebaal Peh?
Because the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral nature of the Torah Shebaal Peh allows for its responsiveness to its development. The minute that you write something down, fossilizes. And that's why when they wrote it down, even when they wrote it down very minimally. The Mishnah is not a big, elaborate work. It's a very minimal, concise work. And the more you write down, the more people hesitate to change it, because it's there, it's written, it's in writing in front of you. I mean, I've had this experience many times where I'll say halakha, and the stupid Sidur has a halakha that's wrong, or that's not according to us, and everybody says, yeah, but it says in the Sidur. What do I care what it says in the Sidur? So the Sidur learns Shulchan Aruch? It doesn't matter. When people see it written in front of them, it's a psychological thing. They can't change it. They can't, it's stuck forever.
So shouldn't that be true though for the Gemara, but not necessarily for the Torah?
It's the same, but it's as much of a disaster, if not more, the Gemara. But the Gemara tried, Ravina Rav Ashi, they worked on like holding and maintaining the dialectical process in the Gemara, so that you should be able to see how it's supposed to happen, at least, right? Very difficult thing to do, but that's what they did. Daniel Levy.
So once Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote it down, does that ultimately break the ability for someone to have to be a mekubal anymore? Meaning, if they're learning Mishnah, they can no longer be a mekubal.
So you'll see how Rambam deals with it. We're going to develop it. So. Anyone else? Yoshua ben Zadon, I see you did your hair tonight. I'm very proud of you. Very proud of you. Okay.
I appreciate it.
ואלוהם גדולי החכמים שהיו בבית דינו של רבנו הקדוש וקיבלו ממנו. And these are the Hachamim who were in the Bet Din of Rabbeinu HaKadosh and received from him. Right? So this is besides the teaching of the Mishnah, besides the writing of the Mishnah, this is how the reception, you hear Daniel Levy, this is how the reception happens following. Who are these people? Shimon v'Gamliel banav, right? His kids were also Shimon and Gamliel. Right? He didn't stop the naming process. He continued. Rabbi Afes. See, these guys now, because remember, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is the last of the Tanaim, essentially. He's in the final generation of the Tanaim because he's writing the Mishnah from everybody who came before him up to him. So from him down, there are these names that we're reading now. They're names of the Gemara. They're names of the Moraim. Rabbi Afes, Rabbi Haniya ben Hama, Rabbi Hiya, Rabbi Anai, Bar Kapara, Shmuel, Rabbi Yohanan, Rabbi Oshaya. Rabbi Yohanan, by the way, is the author of the Talmud Yerushalmi. Right? That's the Rabbi Yohanan and Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yohanan. Elohim Gedolim Shigabiru Mimenu. V'immahem alafim urbabot mish'ar hachamim. These are the hachamim received from him, and together with them, meaning others learned, were thousands of people learned. Rabbi Yohanan qatanaya, but he was very young. Rabbi Yohanan. Ve'achar kach haya talmid Rabbi Anai v'kibel mimenu Torah, but the bulk of his Torah he received from Rabbi Anai. V'chein Rav. Notice it says Rav. Rav is the Rav in Shmuel. So notice that it says over here Shmuel. See how it says Shmuel Kibel B'Haniya ben Hama. Shmuel is the student of is one of the Haberim of Bar Kapara Rabbi Yonai B'Hiya. So Rav and Shmuel, who if you've studied Gemara, you've heard of them, right? They were contemporaries and they were Bar Pilukta. They argued together. Rav was older than Shmuel, and we say about Rav Tanau Palig, which means that Rav is considered a Tana because he was the earliest Emorah. And even though he's considered an Emorah in the Gemara, with regards to arguing with Tanaim, Rav can argue directly with Tanaim. Rav Tanau Palig. Everybody else can no longer argue on the Tanaim. Why? There's no rule. They accepted that that's going to be their rule. They accepted that rule upon themselves. That in order to solidify the Mishnah and to establish its authority, we will not argue directly on the Hachamim of the Mishnah. And it's a Kabbalat HaRabim. There's no rule that came from heaven that said we're not allowed to argue on the Hachamim of the Mishnah. Nobody ever said such a thing. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even know that the Mishnah was going to be written. There's no rule. So how does that rule come about? The rule comes about because everybody accepted upon themselves. We're not going to argue with the Mishnah. Except Rav was on the cusp, so they allowed him to argue. But otherwise, we don't argue with the Mishnah. And that ensures the strength and authority of the Mishnah. And that was done to ensure the continuity of the Torah, that it wouldn't fall apart and dissipate into a free-for-all of whatever it is that anybody wants to say. I got in trouble for saying that what people did do in the Gemara was to establish ukimtaot on the Mishnah. And what the ukimtaot of the Mishnah are saying essentially that the Mishnah should be understood in these terms. And so it's not a way of arguing directly, but it's a way of redefining a Mishnah. And they killed me for saying it. And the problem is that they didn't ever see that Rabbi Yisrael Fisher writes very explicitly in Bet Yishai that that's exactly what they did. They think that I pulled that out of the heavens somewhere because I got up on the wrong side of the bed one morning and I decided to say some crazy things about the Hachamim. Because Hash Shalom, I ever studied anything in my life. But I digress. So here we have Shmuel and Rav and their contemporaries, and they already are coming into the post-Mishnaic period, just the period after the Mishnah. Rav, for example, Chiber Sifra, B'Sifrei. These are explanations on Vaikra and B'Midbar, Sefer Vaikra and B'Midbar, halachic explanations of Sefer Vaikra and B'Midbar. Lebaer ulhadi'ai, excuse me, Shmod B'Midbar. Lebaer ulhadi'ai kareh Mishnah, in order to be able to elaborate. See, they realize already the Mishnah is so concise that they have to start elaborating on the Mishnah of their Rav. So they do. They start elaborating on the Mishnah of their Rav and the Sifra and the Sifrei. And Rabbi Hiya Hibera Tosefta Lebaer Inyanei Mishnah. Tosefta is exactly what it sounds like. It's Tosefet, right? It's the appendix, additions to the Mishnah, added elements to the Mishnah. V'cher Rabbi Oshaya v'chen Bar Kapara Hibiru Baraitot. They added Baraitot. What is a Baraita? Why is a Baraita called a Baraita? Who can tell me? Who can tell me?
It's outside.
Is that Yoshua ben Zadon with his hair?
Yeah.
What does that mean? How come it says, but how come that's outside?
Bar
Why does that mean outside?
Well, bar is outside, isn't it? In Aramaic.
Nechon. Bar means outside. Ligo is inside. Bar is outside. Like in Arabic, barra. Barra is outside. So the barraita, and it's not a brisa, it's barraita. That's how you're supposed to pronounce it. Barraita means it is a text that was on the outside. The outside of what? The Mishnah. It wasn't published officially in the Mishnah. So the baraitot were still there, and people had them. And so you see throughout the Gemara, they're cited. And you know in the Gemara when it's talking about a baraita, because instead of saying tinan, which tells us we learned, and learned in what? Always in the Mishnah. But if it says tanya, which is the Aramaic form of that, it's referring, it's code for a baraita, right? That it's bringing in a baraita that's saying, well, okay, we have a Mishnah that says this, but we have a baraita who says this. How do we reconcile them? Do we go like the baraita, or do we go like the Mishnah, and so on and so forth? Okay? But the point over here is that the Talmidim of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the Dorot, the subsequent Dorot, the adjacent Dorot that came after him, already are following him in writing things down. So it's not like, oh my gosh, the Mishnah is sacrosanct, and that's the only thing that should be written down. No, they start writing things because they realize that the Mishnah alone is too concise. And so there needs to be elaborations on the Mishnah. And so they're mevaer the Anyanei Mishnah. And where did it hit its first major explosion and presentation? In the Talmud. Not the Talmud Bavli, but the Talmud Yerushalmi, which was written before the Talmud Bavli in Eretz Israel by Rabbi Yohanan. When we say written, we mean it was compiled, edited. Rabbi Yohanan is the major architect of the Talmud Yerushalmi. And that was done. Yerushalmi Beretz Israel, Har Churban Habayit, Bekarov Mishlosh Mot Shana. It was 300 years later. And by 300 years after the Churban Habayit, after the destruction of Bet Midrash, the Talmud is written. And the Talmud is an exposition of the Mishnah in tremendous detail. But even that you cannot even compare the Talmud Yerushalmi to the Talmud Bavli in terms of what was actually written down. And we'll get to that, Be'ezrat Hashem, next time. Because we're going to stop at the Talmud Yerushalmi. No, you know what? Hold on a second. Yeah, I think we're going to stop at Talmud Yerushalmi. Okay, what's the questions? Michael, I'm Salim.
So the Chachamim, the Amoraim, where was the yeshiva based? Where were they?
I can't hear.
Oh, I'm asking about the Amoraim. Where was the yeshiva? Where were they learning? Where were they?
The Amoraim were learning in many places. There was yeshivot in Eretz Israel, and there were yeshivot in Bavel.
Was there anywhere specific in Eretz Israel? Was it Kerem B'Yavne? Was it in?
They were learning in Yavne. There was places in Yerushalayim. There were places in all over. There were places all over. Depended whose yeshiva. And also there was situations earlier on of the Galut of the Sanhedrin, where the Sanhedrin was. There were 10 different places. There were different yeshivot. Depended more whose yeshiva you wanted to go to. Whose learning did you want to be? Who's like when we say Tana de Be so and so, right? Whose house are you learning in? Whose bait? Whose yeshiva are you learning?
But at the time they were refuting the leadership of the temple, which was the Maccabees. No, wasn't it what the Maccabees?
No, it's much earlier.
Oh, that was before?
Much earlier. That's where the Bet Midrash is still standing. In Hanukkah, the Bet Midrash is still standing.
Right.
Yes. Yehoshua.
Yeah, so you said that the Amoraim received on themselves not to contradict the Tanaim. Is that binding to everyone?
Yeah, yeah. Because it was done by the Rabbim, then it's essentially binding on everyone. Rav Fisher has a very excellent article, a whole inyan on this in the Bet Yishai, which maybe we can do one day. But yes, it's collective. It's collective. Avi Garson.
So the Torah Sheba'al Peh was essentially sealed by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, is what we read. Is that correct?
One can't say that it was sealed by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi because he didn't necessarily have the authority to seal it, but it was solidified by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. It was given a firm shape and almost an unalterable text, which made it border on a Torah shebichtav, and that was part of the issue. But which is why they said, it's famous that they said, when that was done, they had to be doresh the pasuk et latzot ladnai aferu toratecha. Yeah, which the pshat of the pasuk is, it's time to do something for God because they're destroying His Torah, right? They were doresh the pasuk, said et lasot Hashem, we have to do something for God, mishum she'eferu toratecha, right? Because, or we have to do it in order to do for God, we have to be in some way look like there's a hafarat Torah by writing it down.
Right. So part of the reason was also because it was the last Bet Din Hagadol. Is that correct? After Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, there was no Sanhedrin.
Well, yes. What happened was that because going back to what Yoshua was asking, or no, it was Michael was asking, was there was movement away from Eretz Israel, and there was establishment beginning in Bavel, and the Sanhedrin can't function outside of Eretz Israel. But Bavel was becoming very strong and prominent. So it wasn't a snap of the fingers and everything shifted. There was this gradual shift that was happening. That's why we're going to see, like, there was the development of the Resh Gluta. And then there was a question of the Resh Gluta and the Nasi, and how they interacted with each other, and the Kiddush HaChodesh, and the authority of the Sanhedrin, and all of that. That shifted, absolutely. So those were causing definite issues in terms of how Torah Sheba'al Peh could survive, because the system that we relied upon, which at its heart was a reliance on unity, which was falling apart. And that's something that people do not realize even today. They don't understand that the reason why we cannot do the things that so many people think we need to do with regards to halachic authority is because we just don't have any central authority. Today more than ever before, which we'll see as to why. But I think that I'm going to say on the side, I think it's very significant because it's exactly where we're supposed to be. In other words, we are supposed to get to a point in which we just can't stand it anymore. That's why when we say in the Beracha, Hashiva Shoftenu Kebarishona, which is essentially a prayer to bring the Sanhedrin back. And we pray for it every single day. And we say, Haser mimenu yagon va'anaha. That yagon is akin to agony. The word agony is its roots in yagon. Yagon and anaha is this despair, this agony that we find ourselves in which genuinely this is not how we're supposed to live. We're supposed to live with a living, responsive, conscious Sanhedrin. That's how the Torah was tailored. And we are so terribly stuck. And we're feeling more and more and more stuck. And one of the reasons we're feeling more and more stuck is because we're losing more and more central authority. It used to be that, okay, so you lived in wherever, Amsterdam, you lived in London, wherever you lived, so your Bet Din was the authority. And they had carte blanche. They could establish what they needed to establish for their Am, for their klal, for their congregation. Now, oh my goodness, it doesn't matter where you live or what you say or how you do. You're subject to being annihilated by people across the face of the earth. It doesn't matter what you say or who you are. So it's gotten to a point where we just can't stand it anymore. But that's exactly where it's supposed to be. Because as it says that the Mashiach and the Bet Midrash and Yerushalayim are not coming back to the people until they can't stand it anymore. Until they get to the point that they need to have it. Because the way that they lost it was ma'asu b'hem. They were disgusted with having it. Oh, you're disgusted with having it? Not a problem. We could take it away. Okay, so you're living without it? You're living without it for how long? 1,000 years? 2,000 years? However long it takes you until you realize you just can't stand it anymore. And that you need them. And then you'll ask me for them. And when you ask me for them, I'll give them to you. And so we're experiencing that. That's why Rabbi Yohanan says about the days of the Mashiach. I never tire of quoting that because the Harambam brings it. He brings it in the Ma'amar Tirat HaMetim and also in the Geret Teman. So Rabbi Yohanan says about the days of the Mashiach, Yetev Elah Hamineh. Let them come, but I just don't want to see them. They're terrible. It's not going to be pretty. Yeah. Okay, Sina.
I don't know what I can ask after that. That was
Okay.
very, very important.
You don't have to ask. Unless
Just
you
the
have
rough
something you
fissure,
wanna
the
ask.
rough fissure, the rough fissure on Mishneh authority. I missed that. What was his chidush, if you like, that you were saying about the redefining of Mishneh authority?
He said that they used that the Omoraim, because they could not argue on the Mishnah and they needed to be able to adjust the Mishnah, they would use an ukimta. An ukimta is a mode or a way of understanding the Mishnah that the Gemara uses, right? And say the Mishnah should be understood in this context. And if it's in this context, then it would be explained this way. So what do others say that are not Rav Fisher? Others say, well, that was just the Mesorah that they got, that the ukimta was lost somewhere, and they said, no, this is how you're supposed to read it. And what Rav Fisher is saying, it was not lost somewhere. They established the context of the Mishnah in that capacity because as a means of ensuring the authority of the Mishnah while still being able to make things malleable and responsive to the needs of the time, which is in line with right? You go to the shofet in your days, as Rashi says, the only relevant shofet to you is the shofet in your days, by definition.
Understood.
Okay? Okay, Ad Khan, gentlemen.
Brilliant.
So we stopped at Talmud Yerushalmi. Again, I
Thank
apologize for the late start tonight. Forgive me, Mechila. I hope.
How was the wedding, though? Good
Yeah.
wedding?
What?
It was a good wedding?
It was a nice wedding. Thank God.
Good. Beautiful.
Thank
All
you.
right. Rav, thank you so much.
Good to see you all.
Thank
Be
you very
well.
much, everybody. Thank you for making it. And
Sure.
I'll be in touch via the WhatsApp group. Really, really good to see everyone.
קצין הרצון תעתריכם. כל טוב.
Thank you, Rav.